That the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
Hello and welcome to the Fear of God podcast. All you could ever need or want to know about the Fear of God podcast can be found at thefearofgodpodcast.com. I am one of your hosts, Nathan Rouse.
And I am one of your hosts, Reed Lackey.
At the Fear of God, we always find that it's better to explore than to explain, but every now and then, seismic shifts come along that call for the act of exploration to bear fruit in what might be called explaining.
If our show were solely a horror movie review show, then it might not be worth the energy to make this distinction, but using what scares us, whether what scares us is a movie monster or a spooky cabin, or maybe even a pile of clothes, or maybe what scares us is to take an afternoon drive or an afternoon jog, or to be in the same space with people who don't look like you, scared of what they'll say or what they'll do if things go badly.
We here at the Fear of God examine these things that scare us. We bring them out into the light, and in so doing, we find those things that will save us. Truth, self-sacrifice, empathy, compassion, hope, faith, love, community, our own breath.
When we started this series in the morning, it was to learn together how to hold steady in the moment of a global pandemic. Remarkably, through the series, other powerful questions: what is our relationship to the spaces we inhabit, or what does it mean to learn how to lose, have morphed into what is now a national moment of reckoning with our country's own painful original sin.
We mark this episode, appropriately centering on The Leftovers Season 1, with a desire to honor George Floyd, to proclaim that Black Lives Matter, and to confess our failure at properly recognizing our complicity in the oppression of Black brothers and sisters in the United States.
Change only happens offline, but Scripture compels us to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. Practically speaking, that renewal, as it relates to race relations in America and our faithfulness as believers, only comes through listening and educating ourselves. And it's time. It's long past time.
The Leftovers asks the question, can we be made whole? It's a question with no easy answer, despite the church's insistence to the contrary. Much work must be done. But with the work, we do believe something like wholeness can be achieved.
And so in this moment, we acknowledge our position of privilege and commit to stand beside our brothers and sisters and neighbors and friends, people of color across the globe. We hear you, we see you, and we pledge to listen, to learn, and to do better by you as neighbors, in hope and faith that someday you too may be able to fear nothing else and be on your way rejoicing.
We would like now to intentionally observe a moment of silence for George Floyd, for African Americans across the country, for the United States, and for our own repentance.
And now for something really special.
What you watching, what you eating, what you listening to.
Oh, man. Hey, brother.
Hey, my friend. How
What
are
are you
you?
watching? What are you reading?
Ah,
Thank you to Little Gowdy.
oh my gosh. So great. So great. So yeah, gosh, it's been kind of crazy. I would say So my family and I are doing a lot of fun things, but we're doing a lot of like rewatches of things that are really special. I'm going to take this moment to talk very specifically. I debated about doing this because so much has been said about it, in so many different contexts. But we're rewatching the Marvel movies in kind of chronological order as how they happened, not how they were released. And then my wife is also rewatching I Love Lucy, which is one of her favorite TV shows. But I have been, and it has not been very, very long that I've been doing this, but I've been making my way through the entire franchise. So all of the different series, all of the movies. I have been making my way through Star Trek, and
Wow.
yes, I've seen them all at some
Do
point or
you
another.
sleep, Reed? Is a reasonable question to ask in light of the litany of things you just rattled off.
Well, and it is slow going. Like, I'm intentionally sort of bouncing between a couple of different series, but my intention is over time, and I'm just rolling through it at no particular pace, not having a goal of when to finish or whatever, but I'm making my way through. Kind of right now, I'm bouncing back and forth between the original series with Kirk and Spock and all the rest, and bouncing occasionally over to the series starring Scott Bakula, which was just called Enterprise.
Right.
But my intention is eventually to go through all of Next Gen and all of Deep Space Nine and all of Voyager and the new shows Discovery and Picard and all the films. And there's a few reasons why I did it. I've always been a Trekkie fan. That's just always been.
Just a few weeks ago, you had pointy ears on as your headphones, right? Like
I did.
This is not a surprising thing.
But I know it's a fantasy TV show, but I needed a show about people actively trying to do better. And
there you go.
And actively trying to, reach for the best version of ourselves, which is what that show at its heart has always been about. Even, some of the missteps and the worst of episodes are still ultimately about what is our best selves and how do we become our best selves. And, the long
assimilation, right? That's how we become our best selves.
Basically, resistance is futile.
Exactly.
And it's been good. It's been good.
Now,
like,
were there
just in general?
Did you have blind spots? Like, are there pieces of the puzzle you've not seen?
I have yet, as of this recording, to make it all the way through Star Trek Discovery, which was the new sort of iteration. That is the only one I have never seen. All of the rest.
But you started it, right? You talked about it on the show one time.
Yeah. I'd started it, but I haven't made it all the way through season 2 yet. So I've finished all of season 1.
Like your MCU walkthrough, are you, watch this, trekking chronologically through Trek? Come on. You got it.
Yeah, that was good. I am. In fact, there's lots of nerdy things online, but there was a, one that actually, right.
Just in general.
Especially when it comes to Star Trek. But there was actually there's a website, I think it was called MythQuest or something. I just copied the information into like my own personal document rather than keep going to the website. But it lists, somebody took the time to list out chronologically, these are how the episodes happened. Because particularly once you get into the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager, they occupy the same events at the same times. So you will bounce maybe 3 episodes into Deep Space Nine, and then you'll go over for 2 episodes of Voyager, then you'll bounce back to Deep Space Nine, etc. Shows like the show like Enterprise all takes place sort of before any of the other chronology. Yes, pre-Kirk.
And that's the one where at the end of everyone, Scott Bakula is like, oh boy, right? Like that's
it's not the same
one.
Show. It's not the same show.
Okay.
Though I love that show. I do love that show.
I know you do.
But no, so and so I'm playing around with the rules a little bit because I'm you're
such a rule breaker.
I am. But because I'm bouncing back and forth between, a few episodes of Enterprise and a few episodes of original series. But in general, I'm making my way through them kind of as they occurred in the timeline. Once I get to the Next Gen, Deep Space, and Voyager runs, I will watch the episodes as they occurred in the chronology of the show.
So,
and
question from a non-Trekkie. yeah, and I've got an appreciation for that franchise with a passing awareness of aspects and runs on Next Generation, and then more or less all of the films. But what are don't go nuts here if there's a major one like in Star Wars. Okay, so that's where historically I've sat in the battle of the Star franchises. And in Star Wars, it's the question, the fight amongst fans is Rise of Skywalker intentional garbage or accidental garbage, right? So like is what here we go. I'm trying to get revved up, Riri. I'm getting revved up. That one just took us up a notch. What are some of the major franchise fan fights within Star Trek? Or are they as peaceful as the Federation would have you believe?
No, I mean they're pretty darn peaceful. Like, in other words, nobody says that like it's entirely like positive. Like, for instance, the biggest argument that you might get are degrees of preference. Like, right. Yes,
which is
you're going to be
so nerdy.
Yeah, it's like that's the worst of it. Is though. No, you're just gonna get like, oh, are you a Kirk guy, or are you a Picard guy, or exactly, and it's just about degrees of like who your favorite is. And I have some friends who prefer the crew of Deep Space Nine and Deep Space. No, but it's like, but when
O'Brien shows up on DS9, right?
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
I know
so does Worf. I mean, so yeah,
I know that, but
so and when something is derided, it is pretty unanimously derided. So like, for instance, almost everybody agrees that the series finale of Bakula's Enterprise show is a travesty, that it was big, it was a big misfire. They took a gamble that they thought would kind of be cool and fun and whatever, and it did not. It was actually kind of disrespectful to the characters. So it was not like, everybody agrees that was awful. The film Final Frontier, which was the one that William Shatner actually directed, has its fans, but most people agree like that's kind of the weak point of the franchise.
I think what you're identifying there, Reed, is a more meta level sort of thing here, which is it's all in a name. Like, Star Wars, like, people are passionate about it and dig in and are hateful and dumb, but it's built into the name. It's wars. It's about conflict. The essence of the franchise itself seeds its own conflict in its fandom and within the universe of the show. Whereas, I mean, God love Gene Roddenberry, but Star Trek, I mean, it's like, that's not, it just sort of like, I guess we're going for a walk. It's like a constitutional for our day. It's like, go.
No. We're walking together hand in hand into the final frontier. That is what.
But I mean, like, that's the problem. If you want the people, you just gotta seed the conflict. It's like,
no. Like, the biggest
like Russian bots on the internet. Like, all of the problems of the real world, actively and currently, can be reflected in naming Star Wars, and Star Trek.
I mean, kind of. No. I ain't done. No.
Oh,
here's the thing.
Sorry.
No. Here's the.
No,
that's
I'm Star Trek. I'm peaceful.
Yeah.
I mean, peace,
the biggest
live long and prosper.
They have. No, exactly. The biggest conflict that Star Trek fans have is with all the Star Wars like jerks who are like, we're the better thing because we're the. Yeah, right. That's. Sure, you go over there and we will go to our planet and admire everybody's cosplay and share moments on the bridge and all that other kind of stuff. Like, we will be perfectly content to stay in our peaceful little happy Nexus bubbles. And you all go
but
and
you know
debate
what,
over Last Jedi and Rise of Skywalker.
50 years of Star Trek doesn't have Baby Yoda.
It doesn't have Baby Yoda. It doesn't
kind of the like,
Yoda.
wow, there you go, done.
Yeah.
Speaking of,
oh, that's cute.
Oh, thanks. That is not a Romulan.
No.
What I've watched recently, Reed, will not take the 10 minutes that just took, and that is simply that I watched Miss Americana, the Taylor Swift documentary on Netflix. And it was great.
I've never seen. I know there are 2 or 3 out there, like concert footages and documentaries and stuff, but I've never seen a Taylor Swift sort of focal filmic thing. Is Miss Americana like? Would that be what you would recommend? Like, let's say, hey, I'm a
Yes.
semi fan of Taylor Swift, so
This is my good father.
I'm a semi good father. So
3 years of the fear of God, and that reference has come up twice in 2 weeks.
twice.
Yeah.
But so you would recommend
Yeah.
Miss Americana as like where
and
I
in
should start.
fact, as much as I liked the album 1989, I didn't really pay attention to Reputation, I think was the name of the follow-up. And watching this documentary reinvested me in, and we've been listening to Lover around the
That's a
house
good
lately.
song. No,
Well, it's a good
good song.
album. It's great stuff on there. So no, it's good. If you like her, you'll thoroughly enjoy it. If you don't like your stuff having a shred of political nature to it, you might not. But I liked it for that
Oh.
reason, and
Okay. Mhm.
off we go.
She
that-
has gotten
What?
she's
Tell me.
gotten political. No, just she's gotten political in some interesting ways in recent years, and it's been interesting to kind of see her come into her own in that respect. We don't
Well,
need to have
there's
a
a
conversation
really-
about it. I was just like,
even ignoring what it's about, although that's kind of hard to do. There's actually a really amazing scene in the documentary, because I didn't know this. I knew her mom had a strong role in her sort of career life, but apparently her father does as well. And there's this really powerful scene of her surrounded by all what are clearly executives, like her team, like the top level of her team,
sure, yeah,
trying to dissuade her from speaking her voice, and she
wow,
refuses, and it's really powerful.
Yeah.
Is that all you got for your watch or read?
that's it.
Well, everybody, that has been another installment of
What you watching, what you reading, what you listening
It took
to.
us way too long to devise this idea.
So
That is
great. It's
fantastic.
so great.
Speaking
Oh.
of children and other folks singing what you watch and read and listen to, we've got another tiny segment before our main show. Riri, we just had little kiddos sing us. We got another guest by the name of Beetlejuice.
Good job. Let's see, business section. Ooh la la, what do we got here? Let me.
Wow. What was that?
I don't know. That was lightning. I saw your shirt and it got me,
No, it's a team.
it's like my
Yeah.
Palpatine.
Wow. Nailed it.
Riri. All right, Riri. So we got some quick calls to action.
Here we go.
Basically, it's the same as they were last time. Emails for stickers. We've had a number of those come in already. We're doing this for at least about a month. We want your email. We're going to send you a free sticker. Those are forthcoming. I've been in quarantine because my sister's about to have a baby. Okay, so I got to get some stamps. Right, it's going to happen though. So emails for stickers. Go to the website. The front page of the website has a subscribe field. Input your information there. Hit subscribe. Your email will register with us. It already has. So if you've already done it, awesome. You will be getting your sticker and your communication. But once you send us that, we're going to reach out and we're going to send you a sticker for free. What do you have in our calls to action read?
Very first thing is we still need your votes for the best of 2010 for 2020. I'm sorry if you wanted to vote on 2009, you have missed your opportunity because as of this recording, that one is closed. But if you want to chime in on your favorite horror films of 2010, you got to go to the fearofgodpodcast.com. You got to click on the banner at the top. That will take you to the survey page where you can still cast your votes to influence the top 10 favorite horror films of 2010. 2009 is closed, and that episode will be airing along with us revealing your top 10 next week. So go vote for 2010. This is your last chance.
That's amazing. I can't believe we're already there. Also, as you just heard, we are doing audience participation, what you're watching, reading, listening to. So we want you to email us. You can do just an audio version on your voice memo. You can do a video version. Go crazy. Record your kids, record your spouse, record your dog, record someone else in the house, keep a social distance at 6 feet. But we want to hear it, and we're going to use it as we are starting today on the show. That's very exciting, Riri.
Very, very exciting. But that's not all.
That's
Wait,
not all.
there's more. Okay, in just a couple of weeks, we are going to be officially launching the Fear of God Book Club. And our very first installment in the Fear of God book club is going to be Matt Ruff with his novel,
That's
Lovecraft Country. You only have a couple of weeks left if you want to acquire that book somehow, support your local library. You can acquire that book somehow or digitally and read it in preparation for the conversation. Also, relative to book club, if you share to the various social media platforms, if you share our show or an episode of our show or something about our show to your friends, neighbors, fellow whatevers, if you share us and tag us, you will automatically be entered into a drawing for the chance to win an autographed copy
That's
of
exciting.
Lovecraft Country by Matt Ruff. Thank you again to Blake Collier and the 88 Names podcast for introducing us, and we're very, very excited.
Reed, would you like to send our friend back to his model?
All right, it's time, buddy. Home, home, home.
It's showtime.
That's really funny. I totally blanked on that. I was like, what is he saying? I forgot that's the part of the thing.
I didn't know you could just make up 3 words and throw
Yeah.
it in there.
Oh.
Burrito, burrito, burrito.
Microphone. Oh.
I'm gonna see if this works. Money,
Yeah,
money, money.
Reed. So,
Nathan.
are we going to cry for the next hour? Or are we going to cry for the next hour and a half is the question.
don't
So
know.
we are at the end of our trek.
Mm,
That's not
I
going to get old
appreciate that.
quick.
no.
Of Leftovers, HBO's Leftovers, season 1. We will feature specifically episodes 9 and 10, but I had some trivial bits. If I don't know if you do.
Hey, I have none.
Well, cool. I'm going to go through some of these
Have
trivia
at it.
bits because I have been feasting on Leftovers.
That
So,
was good.
and
I see what you did there.
you like that? You like that? Let me look up something real quick. Boop-a-doop, boop-a-doop, bop, bop, bop.
Stay tuned.
So I do want to highlight a podcast that I discovered called The Living Reminders. Clearly it is off, no longer being produced, but was coincided with the show, was actually not the official HBO version that I could deduce, but they did
Interesting.
interviews with Lindelof, with Parado, with Ann Dowd, Carrie Coon, Chris Eccleston.
Wow. Wow.
You know, this has come up once or twice, but Matt Jameson in the book is only in it for like 2 pages. That's
did
how
remember
small his role is.
That, yeah. Mhm.
So that was really fun. I referenced the podcast because that and a YouTube video is primarily where I get some of this information here.
Interesting. Yeah.
Secondly, you were right. You referenced recently, though your aim was near the mark. Kevin Jr. was the mayor, not Kevin Sr.
Ah.
So Kevin Jr. Kevin Justin Theroux's character was the mayor of Mapleton, not the chief of police, as he is in the show.
Got it. Okay. Yeah.
So
I thought I
this-
remembered something like that.
This you're going to find really fascinating. This I found in external interview source, but Eccleston references it in his interview on Living Reminders. So when he was on Fresh Air, he told Terry Gross that playing Matt Jameson on Leftovers was one of several life experiences that had led him to stop identifying as an atheist.
No, really?
Mhm.
Wow.
His quote from that show is, "I'm no longer sure now. I had made a great play a number of years ago about my atheism, and things have changed in my life, and I'm no longer certain. So I guess I would have to say I'm agnostic. I had children. I lost my father. I watched him suffer through dementia, had my own crisis earlier in the year. Maybe some of the issues in Leftovers, my relationship with Lindelof, because Matt Jameson in the novel has such a short role. Damon was surprised I was pursuing that role, but I pointed out to him that it's a great dramatic character, an Episcopalian reverend who possibly was not taken in a biblical rapture. It is just there for the taking. He claims, Lindelof, that I said the man's reaction to that would be to become more religious. I don't remember saying that, but that's what Damon claims. We had a discussion about faith, and Damon said, look, that's a difficult question to answer. And he says, I find myself there now, really. I just feel that when I was stomping around saying I was an atheist, I was not thinking about it enough. I think I was. I think there's certainly a huge part of me that feels intense anger against organized religion, but I do feel at the moment a little more spiritually open to what may be religious beliefs. Just really amazing.
Wow,
Kind of.
and that was put very lovely. Like that's clearly a very thoughtful way to enter into that sort of awakening. And yeah, that's wow, that's really,
Well,
that's really
and
interesting.
then you'll love this. So in this YouTube video, and it's an interview. It's Lindelof and Parada. They're not so much interviewing each other, but they are just in conversation about season 1 specifically.
Yeah.
And so apparently in the book, Matt Jameson abandons faith. And referenced just there by Eccleston, Lindelof in this interview says, in the book, Matt Jameson has left his belief system, but Eccleston asked, what if Matt doubled down? And that is reflected in the roulette sequence.
Oh,
Isn't that amazing?
And that there's so many great moments in this show, but I still think that roulette scene is
so good.
It's one of the best moments of the show. It's great.
Well, and watching that little video, and I'll post this in the show notes. It's like 15 minutes long, but they cut to the scene of the smile in the, at the roulette table.
Yeah,
it's so great.
Right.
Lindelof says Nora is the most direct embodiment of the show that we want to be making. The most direct victim of the sudden departure, but really just striving for what to do next. And this is just a funny anecdote from Lindelof. He said, again, this is circa the end of season 1. He said he was surprised people considered the first season bleak, but then looking through that lens, he saw it and then said, we're going to stone Gladys anyway. Oh,
wow.
Man. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Those are fun. I'm glad you dug those up.
Yeah. It was fun. I love the show and love listening to people talk about the content of it. So we are looking at episodes 9 and 10. There is no need for TV Guideposts music. This is the Garbies at their best and the Prodigal Son returns. My last note here is Lindelof refers, unsurprisingly, to the Garbies at their best as his favorite episode of season 1.
That, it's interesting because this episode particularly, like, I love that it exists and I love so much about it. And I feel like one of the most impactful moments of the entire season is the ending of this episode.
Oh man.
For in so many ways. So yeah, I can understand. I don't think I would cite it as no. I mean,
everybody I know has got a big.
Everybody has a
What's your
everybody
big
I know is good. I was trying to quote it.
I know.
You got there first.
What you doing?
No, but I can't quite cite it as my favorite episode, though I do love a lot of things about it.
Well,
and I
it's the
understand why some
most
people would.
Lostian of this season, I think.
Yeah.
Like,
well, because it goes back in time.
Yeah, and just filling in gaps.
I do love. That's my first note. I love the way they play with the reveal that you're about to see into the past, because up until that point, he's jogging. And then he gets to this house that you don't recognize initially, but you're like, maybe this is, further down, and he and Nora have done whatever. They've moved on. And like Laurie is intentionally obscured in the background, out of focus, until finally she walks in and it solidifies that, like, oh, we're dealing with something in the past, because here's Laurie, and either in the past or in the far distant future. But I just love the way that they played with that a little bit.
I think one of my favorite elements of this episode is the turn of Laurie being the therapist for Patty.
Yeah.
I mean, that is such a wild card to play. And yet makes perfect sense about why their dynamic is the way it is in the present. It's like,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because that moment when Patty's sitting there saying something big is, something bad is about to happen, and it does. The big one, and it substantiates so much why Laurie would get to a place to where she would like, man, gosh, maybe Patty was onto something. Maybe Patty is onto something, and then therefore join the guilty remnant. That was a really, really great pivot.
What else you got about this episode?
So, to be honest, I didn't take a lot of notes. I wrote down Kevin's dad's line.
That's great.
Which is so wonderful. He says, and And the part that I wrote down is just he's telling him, he said, "You have no greater purpose because it is enough." And yeah, so anyway, go
Well,
ahead.
because Kevin immediately beforehand, who we know is wrestling with his own sort of, you know, anger issues, self-worth issues,
Sure.
whatever you want to call it, he says, "Why isn't it enough?" And he's referring explicitly to his family.
Right.
And
Right.
Kevin Sr. says, "Every man rebels against the idea that this is it. He fights windmills, he saves damsels, all in search of greater purpose. You have no greater purpose because it is enough."
Yeah.
Which
Yeah,
will
that's
come
great.
back to play
Yeah.
the theme. I did want to mention in the Garveys at their best, I love a lot of what the performers get to do that's new for them in this new context. I feel terrible for the poor actor playing Jill. She gets the awful end of
With the braces.
the braces and the just she reminds me of Jimmy Fallon's ew. You know, it's just,
Yeah. Yeah.
that is exactly what it didn't click with me watching it, but it does now. That is Jimmy Fallon's ew.
It's so funny.
God,
Yeah, so it's like
at his house.
I agree with you there. So I spent this entire episode just sort of enjoying it and again not taking very many specific notes. But I have to say before we move on into the finale of the season, that whole like 4 minutes of departure scene is just
I was clenching my fists. I was just like Under the Shadow. I was laying in bed watching this, and I was just laying there with my fists at my side. Just
man.
So tense.
Because you kind of can presume, obviously you acclimate early on that this episode is in the past. So we're seeing everything as it's progressing through certain stages of people's lives pre-departure. It's a pretty safe assumption that before the episode is over, you will experience the departure. But where everybody is in the moment, I was stunned. And this is, again, my second time seeing it, but I had forgotten so many subtle things. Like, I love that the kids are all holding hands and igniting I forget what you would call that, but it's the science experiment where the collective thing. It's the collective energy of everybody joining hands is creating like a static electricity and causing this obelisk or whatever to ignite. And I love that the departure happens, so everybody's faces are smiling, but suddenly the light just goes out, and I'm like, oh my God, that is incredible. And then of course you have all of the other different moments culminating into the most
terrible.
Oh my gosh, because you have, so I just want to cite the big moments that they give you. So obviously you give, Jill and Tom are like holding hands with all these other school kids and the light goes out. So that's one thing. And then Nora has just been just so frustrated because she was waiting for a phone call about a job offer. And then her child spills something right on her phone, and she tries to answer right as it's ringing, and she tries to answer it, and it won't answer. And so she yells out in rage at them as she's trying to dry her phone, and then they're all gone. Husband and two kids are all gone. And yeah, just that look on her face when she sees what's happened. And then, of course, it moves to, I had completely forgotten this, that Kevin, who I knew was having an affair at the moment it happened, but had completely forgotten that his lover departs. So like that image where he just pulls the sheet back because she's just gone, and it's that's stunning. But of course, the worst of all is that Lori is having what is presumably, I guess, her first ultrasound or an early ultrasound for a pregnancy that she has not yet told Kevin about, and she's having the ultrasound, and it is in the midst of her having the ultrasound that we hear the scream outside the facility that something is going on. And then the last moment, the last image of the episode is she stares back at the ultrasound machine where before there was a baby and a heartbeat, and she's now got tears in her eyes as she leans up from the table. And it doesn't show you the screen, but you know exactly what she's seeing. And that is staggering to me. It is devastating, but it is so as a story narrative sort of escalation, it's incredibly powerful. And for everything it means for that character, it's just this is an outstanding piece of storytelling. It really is. Did you have any other notes on it before we move into the finale, narrative wise? Because we're gonna have a lot of time to talk about.
Did you understand the moment when Kevin is smoking and the women pull up to him and they say, "Are you ready?"
So no, what I took that moment to be was something like just sort of like a cultish sort of figure, but I didn't know if it had any sort of particular resonance. So no, if there is some, it might have missed me.
Well, what is Kevin doing right there? And what is he wearing? He's wearing a white t-shirt and he's smoking. These women pull up and they say, "Are you ready?" And he says, "Excuse me, I thought you were someone else." I think it's the GR. It's the seeds of the GR. They're collecting. They're gathering.
So here's what's interesting.
That's how I took it based on his look. Like, why would they interpret otherwise? But
so,
go ahead.
Yeah, no. I don't think you're wrong, because I even had that notion as I was watching it. But I'm just like, it's just so strange to me because they didn't. I don't know. It's because I don't know how to contextualize that it hasn't happened yet. You know, like
Well, I mean, think about Patty.
Exist.
I mean,
sure.
Clearly, all I'm saying is clearly there were and in fact, you know what? I'm going to throw this little missile through the roof. Tom Perrotta adding to this particular moment. Well, he doesn't. It's not him referencing this moment, but to our conversation. He says of crafting the novel, he wanted to avoid the rapture as a conceit in order to avoid the secularism versus Christianity conversation. And instead, the sudden departure invites religious improvisation. And I just think there's something really fascinating to consider. And you've got Lindelof, who never met a mystical sort of storytelling point he didn't want to indulge. I think it's signaling just that there are people attuned to what's about to happen, and Patty senses it, and they're starting to sort of gather as part of it.
Wow. Yeah.
That's all I interpreted that as. I just found it interesting and telling that it's because he's wearing a white t-shirt.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's great. Then we get to the friggin' just talk about a missile into the roof. This finale, The Prodigal Son Returns, which I have a lot of notes on this one. My very first note is perhaps my most trivial one. I've always loved the song "Nothing Else Matters" by Metallica.
Yeah.
But that
great
sparse,
usage.
string infused instrumental, it's just revelatory in everything. You know, like it's
Well, I'm going to come back
powerful.
to that scene, but there's a scene before it. It's funny, as troubled as the Wayne story is. I don't know if you'll agree with this. I actually really like the actor who plays Tommy. Like he feels in it. He's very committed. You know, I don't know. I find him just part of a bad storyline. But what was funny is in the scene early, and you know, you'll recall this having just watched it, but Christine leaves the baby.
Yes.
But before that happens, I kept thinking, like, I can't remember what happens to Christine. Does she die right here or something?
No.
And then since she leaves the scene, like, oh, that's what happened.
That's why.
Never to be seen again. She gone.
Nope.
You know, the Nothing Else Matters scene. What I love about that, and what I think this show is, at least on one level, so good at, is you've got Jill and Laurie sitting there, and Jill demanding that she talk, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And the Guilty Remnant preach such intense detachment. But in that moment, Laurie realizes she's attached. And what I love about that moment is Jill right there for Laurie is a living reminder. It is the intimacies and the attachments that remind you who you are.
Yeah.
And it's just a real, I don't know, I just loved that scene. Right after that is Nora finding the bodies of her family. That is
Guilty Remnant's end game here is
Yeah. Talk to me about that.
Is truly horrific. Like,
it is.
So it is cruelty on a level worse than any sadistic horror movie villain that we have ever covered. Like the fact that Nora would just wake up
Yeah.
and come down there and find them, because it is so like them. So what happened, for listeners who have not watched the show or whatever? We mentioned earlier that there's this company that will take photographs of your departed loved ones and craft a mannequin of them, a relatively lifelike, with skin and whatever mannequin of them, and send it to you so that you can bury them, or so it's a totem, if you will, of exactly what how you can sort of make your way through processing this grief and all that sort of stuff.
And you may have just said this, I'm sorry, to have a body to bury, even like just the normal.
Yeah.
Okay.
To have a body to bury. So what the Guilty Remnant did is they snuck into people's houses the night of the holidays and stole a bunch of photographs, which people didn't know why they were doing that. I couldn't remember why they were doing that. Then where they get their money, I don't know, but they sent off, exorbitant amounts of money to get these departed loved ones made into these mannequins, and then they snuck back into people's houses and put those mannequins in their houses. So these people presumably woke up and found not their loved ones back returned to them, but the soulless, lifeless. Yeah, facsimiles is a great word. Like just these fabrications of what that look enough like them to make it so painful and real that they're gone, and to be this just sort of enraging kind of pouring salt into the wound, like just completely throwing it in their faces. And I'm like, this is some sadistic crap. This is beyond just like sort of reminders or whatever. This is awful. And people's reactions, of course, are incredibly violent, and these people begin to kill members of the Guilty Remnant and beat them within an inch of their life. They set the entire Guilty Remnant compound ablaze, and it's just it's an understandably very visceral and violent reaction.
So you had been saying the last couple of weeks of not having concretely remembered what happened.
Yeah.
Did going into this episode, you remember? Did you know? Like,
I didn't fully remember. In fact, what I thought happened was I thought something about that building, like where they were stacking up all the clothes and where they were doing everything. I thought that, yes, the church. I thought there was going to be something that took place at the church. So I was remembering wrongly until Nora woke up and came down and found them.
Yeah.
Then it all clicked together. The moment that I did remember, oddly enough, of all things to remember, the moment that I did remember is, and I couldn't remember who it was, but Meg.
Yeah, you said it. Yeah. We made them remember.
Something like, and so that, memory sort of pinged to me, but I couldn't. Anyway.
Well, and what's wild about the mannequin things is how approximate they appear, and yet how ghoulish and uncanny at the same time. Like, they're which just adds to the effect. Excuse me, right?
Man.
Just adds to the effect of just horror and trauma.
Nora's reaction,
is
dreadful. She falls apart. I mean, like, oh my gosh! But then it's like, oh God, I love Nora as a character. I just love her character so much. She falls apart and just becomes this puddle of emotion. But then we see her again sitting at the table with them, like holding their hands. And I'm just like, oh my God. It's incredible. It's really incredible.
Well,
that's not in the book. I don't remember that in the book.
What?
Guilty Remnant's plan. I don't remember that in the book.
It would surprise me if it's not. I don't know. I haven't seen contrary or affirming otherwise, but
I don't remember a lot about.
I don't know.
I don't remember a lot about the book, but I am almost positive that end game is, if it's in the book, I am much more confident that it is not executed if it's in the book, it might be something that is like referenced or talked about as something.
Well, we'll
they're
send this
looking
episode to Tom
do.
Parada and let him
Yeah,
validate.
that's great.
one or the
That's
other.
great. Yeah.
Have him on, and the two of you can chat it out about what's not
be
or is in
great.
his book.
I
This book
love
club
talking,
part 2.
Yeah, exactly. I love talking to writers about what I can't remember is in their book.
Yeah,
like
yeah,
how
yeah.
forgetful.
So,
like I love that.
Sir, I read your book.
That was be
You know,
that'd be a great idea.
Matt's my favorite character. He's all over it. Well, and you know, what you're referencing is the events in Mapleton that occurred during this final episode. What we've kind of skipped over, but is worth coming back to, is the events of this episode that still take place out at the cabin. And so Patty has taken her life out at the cabin. Kevin calls the one person who will believe anyone, more or less. And I actually don't say that blithely. And that's Matt. And Matt comes out and delivers what is one of my favorite scenes of this season. And let me find it here. Matt shows up and he believes Kevin's story that Kevin didn't actually murder Patty, and Patty's body is just in a pool of her own blood and, you know, lifeless and gross. And Matt goes over to close her eyes, and Kevin stops him and he says, "If you touch her, then we're in this together."
Yeah.
And Matt closes her eyes and says, "Then let's be in it." And that is when I texted you. I don't know if I'd be friends with Matt Jameson, but I want to be a friend like Matt Jameson. I mean, what an amazing character.
Yeah, he's
and then
pretty
has
incredible, man.
Kevin, is that from Job that he's reading? I didn't look it up. I think it is.
I believe it is. I didn't look it up either, but I believe it is. That whole scene is so powerful.
Amazing.
Oh my
And then Kevin's breaking down when he says, "I have not departed." Did you catch that?
Yes. And he pauses at the word departed. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that whole moment is such a powerful moment for Justin Theroux as an actor and a performer, but for that character too. It's just an incredible scene. And Matt at the end, just a simple amen. And then, you know, gets on with it.
Well, as an insertion there, listening to that Living Reminders podcast interview with Eccleston, he recounts a story, which is probably just a mix in this journey for him to agnosticism, as it were, where he was unfamiliar with the story of Job, and previous to Leftovers, there was some event in the UK, like a dedication or some centennial event of a major cathedral, that he and several other British actors of renown were invited to come do readings at, to like honor the event.
Okay. Yeah.
His reading was from Job. And he talked about how he was unfamiliar with the text before then and what an impact Job had on him as a story and as a character.
Yeah.
And so that's why I think that text is from Job, but I can't remember exactly.
Well, and I couldn't remember. So when we find out ultimately it's a dream, but so when Matt then takes Kevin to the asylum and everything, I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't remember that Matt did that. Like, I was sitting there, I was like, I thought Matt was like, you know, gonna kind of protect him and gonna kind of shield this. So then after everything that he's going through, and then he sees for the first time the sort of spectral Patty, you know, which looks just like Patty's in the same room with him. But that is when you had mentioned earlier, do I wonder if the seeds of, you know, Kevin's father hearing voices and stuff, I had forgotten that Patty returns in this season as one of the voices. I had thought that didn't arise until into season 2. So yeah, the fact that she, you know, appears in that space, you might have been onto something with, maybe they were kind of sort of trying to prop up that context so that, you know, oh, this is what Kevin Sr. is experiencing, is he's seeing or hearing the voices of those who are not with us anymore. And
well, it's funny you mentioned the dream sequence, because I wrote down the "want to be a friend like Matt Jameson" line, and then it cuts to him dropping him off real abruptly, and I literally wrote "or not." Yeah, I was like, I think this is a dream sequence, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
That was funny. Oh man, you just said something, made me think something else. Interesting. Talk about seeding things through my reading and interview listening. You aren't incorrect that Lindelof likes the closed book version of season building,
Yeah.
but in interviews talking about what comes next in season 2 post the text of Parada's book, and if you're going to watch the show, we would encourage you to continue to do so. They change locations in the series, and so they pivot.
Yes.
And two interesting notes there. One is the location pivot. The idea for that came as they were breaking season 1, the idea of Tom and Christine's journeys and where it would take them. And so that's where, because the idea was, okay, well, maybe they end up at a town where no one departed. And so that gets scrapped in season 1 and then explodes out as the basis for more or less 2 and 3.
Wow.
And then the other thing is he talks about Jason Kadam's work, specifically Friday Night Lights and Parenthood, being because he finished Lost and then did a couple of films, and he was talking about how all the shows he missed making Lost, he was catching up on. So he's binging Friday Night Lights and Parenthood.
Oh, okay.
Those were inspirations for the through line of Leftovers, meaning what if we just focus on this family and the people connected to them, as opposed to, and it gave them a pass to not have to deal with, okay, do we have to answer the question of what the sudden departure is? Let's instead just zero in on just these people and how they deal with it.
Right.
It's pretty cool.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, that is really cool. So we've talked a lot about the Holy Wayne plot line and our own sort of despairing places with it. But as much as the plot line annoyed me, that whole scene when he's dying and the whole like make a wish, I did find it pretty affecting, and I love Lindelof is really good. Part of the reason that I like him so much, and this is going to super frustrate, critics of Lost, but part of the reason that I like it so much is the way he's willing to let certain questions linger, like what was really wished for, is it truly granted, all of that other sort of thing. And so
what's hilarious, because you can see me smiling at you saying that, in the interview they had written in the script that Kevin says my family, and Parada stopped him and said, no, the audience knows what he's wishing for right here. You know what I mean? Or for the ambiguity, so they in Lindelof says, and he was right. So yes,
absolutely.
Although you gotta hate it for poor Kevin. Holy cow!
Yeah,
the man wakes up to find himself with his bald, possibly spectral, quote unquote friend, where they've abducted brutally and brutalized Patty, and then she kills herself in front of him. And then he just goes to have some waffles at a diner or whatever he's eating, and wanders into the bathroom, and there's a gutted man in the stall, who wants to try to hug him, and like, what in the world?
Well, and then
poor dude.
He's like, dude, it's crazy out here. I got to get back home. And then, of course, he goes home, and like all of the things the guilty remnant. Oh my gosh, I get it.
Well, I do think it's weird. I'm sorry to cut you off there. I do think it's wild, Reed, that in the morning, this series began as a meditation and response on a global pandemic.
Yeah.
And the world has ended or that sounded real bleak. The world has turned, our country has turned into a place of rioting. And I thought, how weird that this season ends with divisive, angry people at each other's throats rioting. Like,
it was
what a weird turn.
It was so strange to watch it, man. It was so strange to watch it, because I watched this episode last night as of our recording.
Wow.
And it was weird to watch that scene. I mean, like, weird is not the right word, but
sure.
I don't know that I have the right word, but it was, and I mean, I got pretty emotional watching it because of everything that else is going on, but that was so strange. And I mean, like, Dude, like it's a little strange. Like we were watching this and they were getting ready for Memorial Day while our Memorial Day was happening, and then now this is happening with the thing. It's just really weird. Like a lot of it is just. But I mean, I think that speaks to, we felt very compelled to sort of engage with this show, and there's no possible way we could have planned all of the different coincidental things that have come to light from it. But it has. Watching the show with everything that's going on has really, it's spoken into my heart and mind in some interesting ways in relevance that I don't know that much else could. There's certain pieces of media that you could seek out intentionally to try to converse about this particular moment. But I never would have imagined this journey through Leftovers, just a couple of episodes at a time, would align the way that they have with everything that's happening. And there's so much to say about that moment, about those sequence of moments at the end, but probably the biggest and most impactful moment to me is because we saw in Garvey's at Their Best, Lori speak, because that was in the past, but she hasn't said a word at all this entire season. Post departure, she has not said a word. But the first word that she says, and you can tell, like after not having spoken for 9 months, it's a little weird for her to verbalize something, but she screams her daughter's name because her daughter is somewhere stuck in a house that's on fire. And she screams her daughter's name to her ex-husband for him to go in and rescue her. And so it says so much for that character who was wrestling with this idea of attachments. And like you said earlier, she realizes that she is attached, and so it's so
I love that tiny thread that affirms what you're saying of the lighter.
Yes.
That she initially discards and then goes back to try to regain. To
try to grab. Yeah. So her first word being Jill, her first post-departure word being Jill, is just so powerful and so affecting. And then, God, we've mentioned it a couple of times. Good God, the score in this show.
It's
the
amazing.
Music in the show. Like
if we weren't at risk of getting tossed in copyright prison for it, I'd tell you to throw it all over the episode. Yeah, man, it's amazing.
It's incredible. If you have some sort of music subscription service, or shoot,
it's worth buying.
Blind buy the stuff. It's haunting and lovely, and it's simultaneously like devastating and uplifting, and it's incredible. The music is incredible. Every time that little refrain comes back in, just everything sort of rises up in my heart and spirit about it. And it's just so those are the notes that I had for season 1. Whenever your notes are concluded, we can start to dive into the the specifics of theme, if you want to, for however long you want to.
A few just quick fire notes that can layer into theme, but might or might not, depending on where we go. The guilty remnant are what happens when ideology supersedes people. Did I say GOP or guilty remnant? I can't remember. What did I say?
Wow.
Mapleton is on fire. Nobody wants to help them while they are being assaulted. It's wild. Nora's letter to Kevin is really powerful.
And substantiates very, very much the tricklings of theme that you introduced either in last week or the week before about like how the show is about, can we be okay? And she very bluntly, directly is like, I was trying to be okay and I can't be. And it's
and one of the biggest Nora Durst thematic character moments is in that letter. She says, maybe we're all beyond repair. And then it ends with her finding the baby that Tommy left on Kevin's porch, saying, look what I found, which is also a Lady Gaga song on the Star is Born soundtrack. That's really great. You want to
no, I know.
You want to prop up the dummies and have a chat?
So there's, I think it should be noted. So the way we're going through this, which we sort of,
man, you didn't even look at me. I was totally sitting like I was waiting. I was like, come on, But you can't see. I've got my hands just sitting on my desk and just staring off blankly, like I replaced myself while you were gone, while you weren't looking.
Wow. So it's weird, the evolution of these, like, sort of us covering TV shows on the fear of God, because, like, I look back on how, like, we did Ash versus Evil Dead, and we covered 3 seasons, but then just talked about the show. And then in Dark, we realized, okay, the material's dense enough that we're going to do a season 1 and a season 2. Well, now it's just like, okay, Leftovers is far too dense. We have got to just dive into season by season. And I do think the storytelling sort of compartmentalizes itself. So I'm going to do my best in sort of the themes and the ideas that I'm looking at to look just at season 1. It will help a little bit to that end that there's much about the other seasons that I can't concretely remember, certain moments here and there. But I feel like the biggest thing that I would introduce to the table is I was really, obviously, in the final episode, the Guilty Remnant's choice and their long journey into sort of, we made them remember kind of thing. I don't even have real concrete words to wrap around this, but this notion of, like, remembering and coping and moving on. I can remember in his very affecting book, A Grief Observed, C.S. Lewis had written, and A Grief Observed, for those who haven't read it, is C.S. Lewis's sort of immediate aftermath writing down after his wife died and sort of processing through some of that grief. One of several moments in that book that stands out to me is he said he was afraid of forgetting her. Like he was afraid of, forgetting precisely what she looked like or forgetting precisely what she was like, because now all he was left with was his memories, and that was the lens, because she would continually surprise him, and she would continually, like, she would just confront him or, cause something unexpected to happen that was more fully her. And he was afraid that all he would be left with is just his memory of her. And so trying to wrestle down things that Patty said about, we accept that this has happened and other people are just trying to forget about it. And I'm trying, in some ways, in real time in this conversation, trying to wrestle down all the different thoughts that this season made me feel and think about, the process of remembrance and moving on. Because I do think that you look at an ideology like the Guilty Remnant, and you look at, like, I'm going to just blurt the thoughts out as I think them. In a way, to a degree, they're on to something. The thing that they're on to is, to some degree, you can't pretend this just didn't happen. Like, you cannot just ignore it. At the same time, I feel like they very much want to, or maybe not want to, but they very much feel their purpose and mission is to stay stuck in it. They're living reminders. They want to not move on from it. Hence, they do this hideous, heinous thing to where they throw the absence of these people's loved ones in their faces. And so I feel like there is some degree of maturity that has to be struck between. I was having a conversation, and you've said it we've said it a couple of times in this episode already, that this whole series and examining the leftovers and everything, it began, at least initially, as a way to observe and perhaps contextualize navigating this global pandemic. And I was having a conversation with a church peer just earlier this week, and I said, my assessment of so many things is there are people at the moment who are just absolutely desperate at whatever cost to get back to normal and to get back to, we need to just bring everything back in. We need to just, sort of muscle through this, get things back into normality, get things back into, or normalcy, get things back into a sense of rhythm and place and familiarity, if you will. And I feel like I've really, in the context of thinking about this show, I've been wrestling a lot with those people who would drive and push us to move on from this. I feel like there's not going to be, and this is what I shared with my peer friend, I feel like those people who just want to pretend this didn't happen are not going to be able to properly assess that it happened to them and how it happened and what it affected in them. At the same time, I don't feel like we have to stay stuck in this. I don't feel like we have to stay, just perpetually circling the drain of, well, this thing has devastated us, and so now we're just always, because I think of it in the context of what's happening right now with, with unfortunately all of the protests and the version of protests that stays peaceful versus the version of protests that, for whatever reasons, turn to violence against people, against property, against whatever else. And there's this sense of, not cynicism, what's the word that I'm looking for? Just inevitability that this is always going to be this way, or that we'll never kind of break through and move on from it. And so in my head are swirling around all of these different complex things. And maybe it feeds into exactly what you had at least briefly mentioned about, can we be okay? Can we be whole? We talked about it to a degree last week, but I feel like there is this very difficult tension between the need to remember, but also the need to move on, and the need to carry the memory with you, but not let the memory sort of keep you stuck in some sort of past sensibility. And so I said up front that I don't have a nice bumper sticker to say, but these are the things that are cycling through my mind that I'm trying to wrangle down some kind of context for. Leftovers, everybody.
Well, I wonder if the question, can we be okay, is just sort of this clanging gong that kind of rings through my spirit sometimes. And what's interesting is Leftovers illustrates means of coping. It illustrates, I don't know if you picked up on this, I wrote this down, the scene in The Garveys at Their Best when Kevin's in bed. He wakes up in bed, alert or alarmed. Laurie's in there getting ready to leave for the day. He gets up and he goes on a run. Do you know what his line is that signals this? He doesn't say, I'm going to go on a run, which is kind of a standard thing. He says, I'm going to run. Then, so you've got Kevin, who, and I will get back to plug in where you're at. You've got Kevin who deals with self-loathing, that then cheats on his wife, and the woman departs, and that self-loathing metastasizes into self-hatred that channels itself in bouts of rage and anger. I mean, gosh, is it the first season that the promotional art is Justin Theroux's musculature body breaking a wall by banging on it?
Yes.
Yes. So you've got that and how we deal or don't, and you've got Nora, and these two characters become kind of the totally effed up Coach and Mrs. Coach of Leftovers, because what is her last line of the season? Look what I found. This woman who will not do the interior work. I'm not saying she hasn't been through the ringer. She absolutely has. But but in the courthouse, do you want to change your name? No, I'd like to keep Nora Durst. Identifier. She finds a brief moment of solace after the Holy Wayne hug that is shattered by the image of the mannequin family that ends with a new external thing. Baby, look what I found. I found this thing. I didn't do the work. And planting these posts here, and hopefully together we can bring a cohesive picture. It's funny, you're referencing the Lewis text. What is the title of that book?
Oh, a grief observed.
A
Yeah.
Grief Observed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if we can be made whole in the most real union with God phrase of that meaning of that phrase in our corporeal forms. I don't know. I do think my wife, a couple months ago, we had this really interesting conversation. And she had listened to a podcast. She was reading a lot of books. I think I've even referenced this. She was reading a lot of books about death and dying from like doctors and sort of this type of stuff. And it was really interesting. And she had stumbled on this podcast interview with an author named Jason Green, who wrote a book called Once We Saw Stars. And this book is a memoir of his, I should have looked this up to know for certain, but I'm pretty sure it was like a 3-year-old daughter. And they were sitting on a park bench one day in a high-rise metropolitan area, and Reed, a piece of debris, of construction debris, small, fell from the top of this building and killed his child while he was sitting with her. And his book is recounting the story of coming to newness and wholeness over time, of course, of this thing, of how can this person be made whole? Can this guy, as you just hear this story, can that person at some point in their future life walk in a wholeness?
Yeah.
And that story has stayed with me, and watching Leftover season 1 and watching these people and watching us as a country. And you mentioned a minute ago, do we have to stay stuck? Is there something correct about the GR? I will say for myself, not that you would disagree with this, I think, but just as you said that, what it made me think is the problem with the GR isn't their call to remember. The problem with the GR is they've pathologized death. They say, COVID happened, that's it. That's it. Shut it down. We are dead. And we're going to make you recognize that you are nothing.
Right.
By living reminders, all that means is we're just breathing. We don't occupy spiritual presence and space. We occupy physical space just enough so that we're going to drag your sorry forgetful asses down with us, right? Like that is the message of the GR. And so if you translate that into a COVID moment, it would be people pathologizing that, like making a religion of staying stuck, to use the language you used a minute ago, right?
Sure. Right.
And it's so wild, Reed. Like, I had, in my prep for talking about theme, I had made a note about Brian Stevenson. And then all of this stuff starts happening. And what's my therapist once told me that anger is just grief we haven't dealt with. And that's why I called to note a grief observed. What does it take to be whole? What does it take for America? Because it's we have to observe. It's Brian Stevenson all the time references South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation process. And he says, this is a thing this country has never done.
Yeah.
And it is killing us. There's so many facets to that are worth consideration outside of this conversation. But I just think there has to be some form of affirmative answer to that question. Otherwise, we should adopt all white and start smoking, right? Like, if we can't honestly say there's a means by which we might be whole individually, locally, nationally, and I don't know, I think think so much about what's happening right now, and it is not in my interest to wallow in this moment long, but thinking about the people who want to identify just the cops who had participation in George Floyd's death as responsible, or pivot away from this thing to identify symptoms of the problem. These are just symptoms. What about the looting? That's a symptom, man. This is a symptom, not the problem itself. And as long as we are content, and we don't know we're content, we just don't know otherwise. We don't know what whole feels like. We don't know what whole looks like, because for myself, one, we have so few moral leaders in our country, sometimes in our churches. And that sounds terribly critical. All I mean to say is it makes sense why we don't understand, because we can't reach consensus on transgression, right? We can't, which means if you can't reach consensus on transgression, you're going to be reluctant to seek repentance, right? And if you have no one embodying any of that you're willing to sort of look to, it just falls apart. It is the cul-de-sac of the guilty remnant, and everyone's throwing their facsimile loved ones on the pyre, right? And and it's so fascinating because I was just blown back by Kevin Sr.'s comment. This character who himself has his issues, but my God, that man can cut like a knife.
Oh
in the moment.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think about that. Like we talked about this on I think on at some point during Remnant, about nostalgia and by and by. And
Yes.
Kevin Sr. says, when Kevin Jr. says, why isn't it enough? And the father says, it is enough.
Mm-hmm.
Stop looking otherwise. Like our inability to, or our craving for the nostalgia that pacifies, our fear of the future that looms, keeps us from recognizing. I think of the end of The Last Jedi. Remarkable how this comes up, and Leia comforting Rey, saying, we have all we need right here.
Yeah.
All I'm trying to say in a very long-winded way is it makes sense that when you deny people their grief, they will respond possibly violently, right? Like, I don't know. I feel like there's multiple layers of things going on right there. I don't mean to confuse the issue, but
no, I understand.
Because you look at, I'm sorry, one last thing. In the Stevenson note, he points to South Africa, Germany, Rwanda. It's the local and the global. Locally, what does it mean to be well? What does it mean to walk whole? What does it mean to be present physically, spiritually, materially, as that keeps coming up? Then globally, nationally, what does that look like? We kind of know because we do have examples, but and again, I'm saying this less as condemning, more as observing. But our exceptionalism, are the lies we believe about ourselves. That's what I was trying to get around to, is truth telling. That phrase is what I wanted to start with and forgot. Truth telling. We mythologize ourselves individually, nationally, and we stop telling the truth about who we are, and that's a mix of things. But because of that, we stop telling the truth then about what we do to other people. And that just goes and 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 goes. Hey, buddy, leftovers.
Hi. But I think I had a really interesting conversation with my wife not that long ago, wherein we began to observe inside the conversation. The conversation we were having was about honesty and about the notion of sometimes I can hear this phrase that people will say, and you use the word truth. That's what's sparking some of this. I can hear people use the phrase like, just be honest or just tell the truth. And one of the reasons I always have a difficulty hearing that is a lot of times I will hear an encouragement to that end, and or a frustration exclamation, say like, hey, just be honest, or permission to speak freely, or whatever. But in whatever context, sometimes I'm sitting there going, I don't know what the truth is. I don't know how I feel. And one of the things I appreciate about this finale in Leftovers is that scene in the diner with Matt, where he says, Matt says to Kevin, what did Patty say right before she killed herself? And he says she told him, you do understand, or you do know.
Yeah.
And Matt
That's
very
a great
matter of
scene.
factly, oh, it's a wonderful scene. Matt very matter of factly said like, okay, well, what do you know? Or what did she mean? And he's like, oh, I don't know. And this is what I love about that scene is Kevin's like, I don't know. I don't know what she was referring to. But I love Matt's concise observation where he's like, if she was willing to kill herself to get a message through, I guarantee you she wanted to make sure you had it before she did it. And it's revelatory to Kevin in that moment. Kevin's not been sitting on a pile of things he's anxious to say. He's been sitting on things he does not understand how to express. He's not been sitting on things waiting for the outlet through which to speak.
Sure.
He's not understood. To what you've talked about mentioned with Nora, she hasn't done the interior work. And I think part of the mistake that we make is in assuming we always have all of the information about each other and ourselves, instead of recognizing that there are things through which you have to go before you can receive the revelation of what it is. I honest to God think that, awful as her character is or can be, Patty saw in Kevin that he was more self-aware than he would let himself admit. And so here's Kevin stuck in this place where all of these pieces are there, but he doesn't know how to verbalize it. Sure doesn't know how to like come to terms with it because he can't verbalize it.
Right.
And so much of what I see going on, we don't know, Nathan. We don't know. Like,
well, right, but
no. Hold on,
please.
People act like they have the answer everybody needs to listen to. So they will spit out all manner of things that people need to say, do, think, feel. This is the fix. This is the problem. This is that. And you have a whole slew of people that are experiencing things related to literal decades and decades and decades of systemic oppression and systemic prejudice. And you have people sitting there feeling things relative to economic disparity and feeling things relative to this virus has turned the world upside down and feeling all of these things and not knowing what to say and what to think and how to feel. And so I think part of what this, for me, this idea of like remembering and moving on is I do see a lot of people acting the way this guilty remnant kind of does, where they're just like shoving it in your face and saying like, no, this is it. This is what it's supposed to be. But they're wrong too. They're not creating a path through which we feel safe enough to do the work and to come to the revelation.
Sure.
And I feel like we sit sometimes in our arrogance and in our anger and think that we know the what everybody else needs to do, and we know the problems and the ways that everybody else needs to act and behave, and we're not humble at all.
Right.
We're not 1 inch humble about any of these problems, and we're not 1 inch humble about any of the complexity, the human complexity that is being put through the ringer right now. Whether, pick an issue, like all of the different things culminating and swirling right now into a maelstrom. And I'm sorry that I like cut you off, but I was like,
no, you're fine.
I have to get
well, and
out.
I want it clear too. One, I'm not trying to oversimplify truth telling, and two, when I say I think there's angles on describing telling the truth there. Like, I mean, you and I had a mutual college peer who was like, "Oh, I'm a prophet. I just tell the truth." He's like, "No, that's not at all what you're talking. This is not the thing. That's not it." Because I think, to use the template of South African truth and reconciliation, at least on a corporate scale, it's telling the truth about what has been done. And in our case, in the United States case, it is this systemic oppression. We have to figure out how to corporately own the truth of that transgression, so that reconciliation, i.e., okay, in light of this truth, what does it look like to make it right between those who have been transgressed against? Now, so there's that puzzle piece. I would say on a more immediate local level, individual level, when I think of truth telling, part of, and let's use Kevin for a moment, part of it is that emotional component, that emotional intelligence, which perhaps Kevin clearly struggles with, of being able to say, I am angry to the depths of myself, and I need help. That's truth telling. By the same token, by what you were saying, you can also be a jackass telling the truth. I'm simply saying truth telling involves, initially, it's that self-awareness of last week and the bubble analogy, right? It's the self-awareness that a lot of us have a hard time with, of saying, I'm really angry, or I'm really sad, or I'm really scared, or I'm really confused. Yeah. I'm in a lot of pain. It's the capacity to name those things. The film Inside Out is such a beautiful template for being able to do that. But once you can do that, that truth telling permits you to begin to reconcile yourself. It's ourselves knowing ourselves. Reed, we are good at this. No, I don't mean it, telling the truth. I mean it, all of these things coalescing,
wrapping it all together. Yeah,
it's amazing. It's ourselves knowing ourselves. It's having the capacity, because I think once you can go through that rigorous process of naming those things inside yourself, you can then, the truth becomes, okay, in light of those things, I am responsible for me. I am responsible now for how those things interact and play out. That's a truth I'm telling about myself. Because the non-dualistic, the mature version of this expression is, now I am responsible for you in caretaking your well-being, your exercising compassion, showing empathy. Like, that's a new level of truth telling, right? To own the willingness and the I think Christ image embodying of taking responsibility for your feelings now. Like yes, not as in I'm responsible for how you feel, that's not what I'm saying, but as in how what I do impairs, impacts, injures, harms you, others. I have to be responsible for that. Thus, I am my brother's keeper. It all comes back to this idea. What we've decided is no one is our brother. Even ourselves. Right? Like, there are so many Kevins walking around in the world, self-loathing, self-hating, angry, yet having to wear this mask that Kevin does of peacemaking, right? Like, good good Lord. He's a 21st century American cop,
Yeah, of course.
you
Mhm.
know?
Yeah. Mhm.
And all I was trying to say earlier too, to pivot back to uh, um, moral guideposts that we talked about on writing, moral imagination, like what we don't trust each other, we don't trust
Right.
ourselves. I don't love the word morality, but you know what I mean when I say moral example. Like we don't
Right.
have someone we look to, and that's why, for me personally, when 6 years ago my life was sort of thrown in the toilet by a person in leadership of faith, it's like, okay, well, moral leadership now starts inside of me, and I got to figure out what it means to bear a Christ image responsibly. And once and if, and again, that's an ongoing, never ending sort of thing, but hero worship is a problem. I'm getting all over the place. I don't mean to. I'm sorry.
No, no. I mean, and I don't want to stifle the space that you need to be able to flesh some of those ideas out. But I think
No.
the other thing is that just it's a process.
Right.
This is
Sure.
a process, and so I'm over in this moment. I am over anybody who wants to try to snake oil peddle me a cheap answer to any of this.
Sure.
Just do X, just do that. One of the most, forgive me, listeners, one of the most frustrating comments that I hear right now is when I hear brothers and sisters in my faith say something along the lines of, well, people just need the gospel, or
Yeah,
people just
yeah.
need this.
It's-
But I want to say why.
yeah.
Is because it expresses an idea the way I hear it. So let me talk about how I hear it and not presume too much about
Sure.
why they say it. How I
That's
hear it.
very mature of you, Reed. I'm proud of you.
Thank you. How I hear it is I hear it saying, you know what? If you just let go and let God, this will all be fine. As if there was some version of quick, easy answer that's going to just write all of this off and make all of this done. And I feel like there are some things which are too, you get pregnant and that child develops for 9 months. And there are so many complexities and miraculous uncertainties that happen along that way. But it is a process. It happens over time. And it is formed and shaped as things progress. And I feel like there are so many traumas in our world and so many problems that people want to find the insert formula here, receive equation there. Like they want to, and this was the other thing that this season sort of like wrestled in and like brought up in me is man's search for understanding of the why this thing happened to who it happened to and why it didn't happen to certain other people. And so many characters in the show are wrestling with that kind of thing. But the thing that I walk away with is just trying to recognize in myself, hey, I'm still coming to recognize in myself. It's not just about admitting things that are in my heart. It's not just about admitting things that are honest and true in my expression. It's about coming to understand those things and coming to recognize that's the word. That's how I feel. Instead of saying like, oh, instead of saying I'm afraid, maybe saying I'm overwhelmed or I'm confused or I have to find the right word that when the right word comes in, I can feel instantly, oh, that's what I'm feeling. That's what it is. But sometimes that takes a process, and it takes a process that requires space and freedom and requires leniency and grace and requires challenge and work and sometimes, to quote the other Lindelof series that we love. Sometimes you just got to sit and stare out at the ocean for a little while. Like sometimes it requires you to just be silent, and sometimes it requires you to work and push effort forth. But I feel like in everything that we're experiencing right now, I'm learning a lot about getting to know myself and getting to know my feelings and thought processes and senses of things that I'm coming to recognize in ways I didn't recognize before. And I'm sitting in the moment pretty okay with the fact that it is a process and not a riddle or puzzle I'm trying to solve. It's a process I'm trying to walk through. I told someone else about the current trauma and the pandemic and trying to get through things and trying to get past the systemic oppression and make sense of the protests and all of the looting and the rioting and everything that's going on and I'm thinking of Kevin Garvey in this moment. Like, the day after you break your legs is not the day to take up jogging. Like, it's not. Like, you have to go through a process of healing and restoration, and you have to sit still for a little while, and you have to recognize, like, hey, some things are broken, and we need to give the time and the care and attention that it needs before they can even get, like, what's the first thing that happens if your bone gets broken? First of all, it has to be set and fixed in place and be still. And it has to just pause.
Right.
We're calling this the great pause. And like it has to just be set and be still. And you can't re-traumatize it, or you'll be counterproductive to the healing process. And you can't, put force against it again, or it won't heal the right way, or it won't heal at all. And I feel like there's so many things that we experience a trauma of sorts, we experience a pain of sorts, and we just want to move on and walk it off. And I feel like we need to be cognizant in these conversations, whether we're talking about systemic oppression, whether we're talking about economic systems coming out of the virus, whether we're talking about how all of this has personally affected you, and how all of this may have, or what maybe things that didn't have anything to do with any of this has affected you. And I feel like we need to just give ourselves the freedom and the space to recognize that this is a process, and it takes time, and it will not be solved by anybody from the church house to the White House or anywhere in between. It is not going to be solved by anybody saying, just do this, just
Sure.
XYZ. That's not going to get us there. It's very personal, it's very specific, it's very complex, and it requires time and it requires space. And the one big thing that I would introduce in the mix is it requires us to do the work to be humble enough to recognize that we have to change.
Yes.
And be humble enough to recognize that we don't have the answers, and we can only probably really know what's going on inside ourselves. But even that, we have to look, and we have to examine, and we have to be self-aware, and we have to admit our mistakes, and we have to be pliable and willing to move forward as a new and a different person.
Yeah. Yes.
That's hard work. My last statement on this, it's something that it's probably not true.
See, honesty.
Exactly. I shared something to social media earlier today, and it was this. I've been thinking a lot lately about the person in the Bible, in the New Testament, Saul of Tarsus. And I've been thinking a lot about how when he held the coats of people who stoned Stephen the martyr, and he then started like this active campaign to try to persecute and imprison and oppress Christians. And he did all of this with a staunch conviction that he was righteous, and a stalwart dedication that he was doing God's good work, that he was doing what was supposed to be expected of him. And it was not until he was stopped in his tracks on the road to Damascus and experiences this vision where Jesus is like, why are you persecuting me? Why are you doing this to me? And then in his blindness, he's suddenly finally able to see all of the ways in which he was propping up oppression and persecution against Christ himself. And I feel like there are so many of us who, in our stubbornness and in our pride, are pressing forward in things that are actively hurting other people and that are actively causing other people to suffer. And in our stubborn insistence that we're doing the righteous or right or good thing, we may be further pressing down, oppressing, and persecuting people who are God's fearfully and wonderfully made children. And until we are willing humbly enough to just be stopped in our tracks and be sort of arrested and examine the ways in which we need to turn around and become, that's what prompted me to bring it up, is we've got to become a different person.
Right.
Because once that revelation hit him, he no longer was Saul of Tarsus. Now he was Paul. And he's like, call me this.
Yeah, and it's funny because I had the thought recently of like this craving for normal when what we need is new. Like it's, which is real pithy, and I don't mean it to be, kind of bumper stickery, but like normal didn't work anyway. I really loved. If you needed some information, I really loved your posts on that. That was really powerful.
Thank you.
I'm not just pacifying you. I'm telling the truth.
No, I know.
Will you tell me that you're not mad at me for invoking truth telling as an idea, that what you're what you're decrying and
absolutely. I'm not mad at all.
Okay.
No, I'm not mad.
You can
at
be
all.
mad.
No,
you can tell the truth.
No, I'm actually not. It was prescient. It was prescient because I've been coming to the revelation just recently that in order for me to tell the truth, sometimes I have to shake hands with the truth and get to know the truth. And sometimes I have to, in myself, sometimes I don't know fully who I am. And I need to recognize and understand the hard work of coming to that awareness. And so, I feel like it was, it incited a particular frustration that I don't have with you, but that I have with the notion of people who peddle cheap and easy truths.
Sure.
As if truth has ever been cheap or easy, to quote John Locke, like it has never been easy. But it's good, and
I could reach through this computer screen, just,
Oh man.
Never been
so
easy, Jack.
So I mean, unless you had, and when if you do, but I feel like this might be a good place to sort of leave it there, unless there was something you really feel left unsaid that needs to be said. Otherwise, we can pivot to the fog meter. I yield to your preference there, sir.
Reed, it is like crazy town. What in the world is happening on this planet?
I know
everything. Like
all of it.
It is a process, and I think you're 100%, you're 1,000% correct there. And it was funny because in the last hour, it's like, are we talking about a global pandemic or racial problems in America that have led to conflagration and all of it? It's right. We were just concerned a week ago about whether to wear a mask or not, and now we're worried if we're gonna die in our homes.
Oh my God.
From whatever.
Lord.
But
yeah, I'm
glad to be here. In the words of Matt Jameson, Reed, let's be in it.
Then let's be in it.
Are we fog meter in this?
Let's do it. Let's go ahead and give it a fog meter. So the fog meter is our very specific metric of fear and God, where we rate the material we cover on its scares and its substance. The Leftovers, very specifically season 1. Fear, it's just weird because it has a lot of existential things to offer, but and some of those things are upsetting and perhaps a bit disturbing or frightening to discuss, but obviously not a traditionally themed horror related show. I'm going to give this a 3 on the fear factor. So what do you got?
I'm going to double down and just double. I'm going to go 6. I think the existential component is harrowing in a large degree. I mean, yeah, there's although the grisly passing of Patty Levin is
That is
pretty awful.
Yeah. That's rough.
What about the God Reed? Not the God Reed, but the God, Reed.
Yeah. Um,
Oh, get out of here.
I'm just talking about season one. I'm gonna give this a 6
Wow,
on
really?
the God meter. Yes.
You're just
yes,
surprising
yeah.
me. I feel like you're.
Well, here's the thing. I say I'm just talking about season one, and then at the same time, I'm recognizing that there are places this show goes that I feel like if I give them comparable scores are not quite comparable. So I have to hedge a little bit because I know that once we start getting into 2 and 3, if I give them the same score as season one, I'm going to feel like I need to go back and retroact my score. So I'm sort of, playing a bit, of median,
Sure.
operation here. And so that's why I'm giving it a 6 at the moment, only because I know where the show's going. So yeah.
Well, then knowing that we give half number scores, I'm gonna go for season one with a 9, knowing I've got room to run.
Oh,
Here at the end. I mean, I say
That's
that
fair.
I'm
fair.
being jokey, but especially the first time I saw this, the place I was in, it was, however painful, astonishingly cathartic and therapeutic of an experience to watch, even for the lesser pieces of the puzzle of season one. The total picture just is a real gripping humans wrestling with trauma story, and I find it really compelling and fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. And that means that we give season one of HBO's The Leftovers a 6 out of 10 on the fog meter. And yeah, I mean, I feel like if I were rating season one, I might give it an overall sort of like that place. But let me tell you, listeners, where you are headed, if you're on for this ride, like just buckle up, because we've got some really galvanizing things coming up in seasons 2 and 3 of The Leftovers. But the most important question before we get into all of that is, would you recommend season 1 of The Leftovers to people?
It is not for the faint of heart whatsoever.
Right.
If you are a bit eyes wide open and enjoy, emotionally wrenching, serialized drama, yes. I mean, I am unquestionably happy to be going back through it. So it's a qualified but hearty yes. I recommend it.
Absolutely. And with me as well, I think we've even said as much, as sort of in passing, because I recommend the show so wholeheartedly. Absolutely, I recommend season 1. Though I usually, when pushing people to watch the show, I tell them not to judge the show on their feelings about season 1.
I can.
Because while I think there's some tremendously great stuff in season 1, I feel like getting to season 2 and 3 are so worth whatever misgivings you might have about what happens in season 1. So if you've been on this journey with us and you're like, I don't know, please press forward, because I feel like 2 and 3
I mean, don't take it from us. Like,
incredible.
Pretty much most lists of the decade has it in the top 5, if not the top 3.
Yeah.
Of the series,
absolutely.
Series itself.
Yeah, the series as a whole. No, absolutely. So that puts this particular phase, hashtag in the morning, phase 1, hashtag remnant, that puts it in the books. And so next week, we're going to take a little bit of a break, maybe come up a bit from some of these weightier considerations, though I'm sure, we're going to go into some levity, right? So next week, we're going to go into a film called Drag Me to Hell, because that's a step up.
I feel like that's how is that? So we're watching a movie called that? I mean, I thought we were kind of like living that right now.
So yes, listeners, next week we are going to be diving back into 2020, counting down, your favorite horror films from each year of the 2000s. We're going to be going into 2009. And while I won't reveal right now its placement in the top 10, the film you should prepare for our conversation next week will be Sam Raimi's Drag Me to Hell. So prep up for that next week, and we will see you then. Nathan, thank you so much for having this conversation with me, as always.
Absolutely.
For suggesting that we go through the leftovers. Thank you for that as well. And as we say on every episode, the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, but not the end of the conversation. And in that spirit, to each and all, whoever you are, wherever you are, and whatever you look like, we encourage you to fear nothing else and be on your way rejoicing. We'll see you next week, everybody.
See you guys.
Bye.